choose Aphrodite as the fairest of the goddesses set in motion the events that led to the Trojan War. His desire for her beauty caused the death of thousands and the fall of Troy. But Aphrodite's beauty didn't just destroy men, it could break gods too. The tale of her and Ares, the god of war, exemplifies this. While Aphrodite was married to Hephaestus, the god of blacksmiths, her passionate affair with Ares led to chaos among the gods. Her beauty wasn't just about attraction, it caused jealousy, betrayal, and ultimately destruction. Despite her dazzling appearance, Aphrodite was also a figure of deceit and destruction, proving that beauty, when it holds such power, can be dangerous. It's no wonder the ancient Greeks warned that appearances can be deceiving. Aphrodite's beauty may have dazzled the world, but her story teaches us that sometimes what's on the surface can mask a much darker reality. So, was Aphrodite's beauty a blessing or a curse? The myths suggest that beauty, when wielded by the gods, is never what it seems. If you want to uncover more hidden truths about gods and goddesses from the ancient world, hit that subscribe button. There's so much more to explore in these captivating stories of the past. Hor, the thunder god, woke up to find his greatest nightmare had come true. Mjolnir, his mighty hammer that could level mountains and control lightning itself, was gone. Without it, the thunder god was powerless, vulnerable, and mocked. The weapon that defined his very identity as protector of Asgard had vanished without a trace. But what happened next would humiliate him more than any defeat in battle. To get his hammer back, Thor would have to do something that went against every fiber of his warrior identity. You won't believe the disguise he ends up in. It all began on what should have been an ordinary morning in Asgard. Picture Thor reaching for the leather grip that had been at his side for countless centuries, his fingers closing around nothing but empty air. The spot where Mjolnir should rest felt cold and wrong, like a missing tooth that your tongue keeps finding. Thor's morning routine, as predictable as sunrise over Asgard's golden halls, shattered in that single moment of realization. The hammer forged by dwarven masters, the weapon that could summon lightning and level mountains, had vanished without so much as a whisper of sound. The initial shock hit Thor like a physical blow. His hand remained suspended in space, still reaching for what wasn't there. Then panic crept in, cold and relentless. He let out a blood-curdling roar of sheer rage, the whole palace trembling. Without Mjolnir, he was powerless, vulnerable, and mocked, stripped of the weapon that made him Asgard's primary defender. The enemies that prowled the borders of the Nine Realms knew about his mighty hammer. They counted on Thor's strength to keep them at bay. Now that strength was gone. Word spread through Asgard's halls faster than wildfire. The other gods gathered in emergency council, their faces grave as they grasped the full scope of the crisis. Odin's ravens had brought no news. The watchmen at the gates had seen nothing. Mjolnir had simply disappeared, as if it had never existed at all. The assembled gods understood what Thor's loss meant for their realm. Asgard stood vulnerable, its greatest protector reduced to a shadow of his former self. Loki stepped forward through the crowd of worried gods, his familiar, cunning smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He offered to investigate the theft using his shape-shifting abilities, volunteering to venture where other gods could not go undetected. The council accepted his proposal immediately, desperate for any lead in their search. Thor watched his brother prepare for the mission, knowing that Loki's success or failure would determine his own fate. Loki first borrowed Freya's magic feathered coat, allowing him to fly in falcon form to Jotunheim without raising alarms. Each dead end pushed Thor deeper into desperation. He imagined facing his enemies defenseless, their laughter echoing as they realized the thunder god carried no thunder. The trail finally led to the most dangerous territory of all, Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. Loki strode into the council chamber with the confident gait of someone who had solved a mystery, but his expression carried an ominous weight. The giant Thrym, lord of the frost giants, had openly boasted about his theft from his massive throne of ice and stone. He had buried Mjolnir 8 leagues beneath the frozen earth of his realm, thrice deeper than any giant's hall, he claimed, placing it where even Thor's strength would be useless. Thrym had what he thought was a simple demand for the Norse gods. He wanted the beautiful goddess Freya as his bride in exchange for the hammer's return. The giant had fixated on her legendary beauty and grace, convinced that possessing both Mjolnir and the goddess of love would make him the most powerful being in all the 9 realms. His arrogance knew no bounds as he described his elaborate wedding plans to Loki, speaking of golden halls and feasts that would last for weeks. Thrym believed the gods had no choice but to accept his terms. When Loki spoke to the council about Thrym's demand, the council fell silent. Freya's reaction shattered the tense quiet that followed Loki's report, causing her rage to break the Brysinger necklace, its gems scattering across the floor in glittering fragments. She declared she would rather throw herself into the deepest ocean than marry the frost giant who dared make such a demand. The gods found themselves trapped in an impossible situation. They could sacrifice one of their most beloved goddesses to a giant's lust, or they could leave Thor permanently weakened and Asgard vulnerable to every enemy that prowled the borders. The council erupted in frantic debate. Some suggested launching a full assault on Jotunheim, but Thrym's fortress was impregnable and his army vast. Others proposed trickery or negotiation, but every path led to either devastating war or humiliating surrender. Heimdall, the far-seeing guardian who watched over the Rainbow Bridge, had remained silent throughout the heated discussions. When he finally spoke, his words stopped every conversation in the hall. His suggestion was so outrageous, so completely unthinkable, that even Loki's jaw dropped open in shock. The gods stared at Heimdall as if he had lost his mind, but they were out of other options. What he proposed, however, would challenge everything Thor stood for as a warrior. Heimdall's words hung in the air like a challenge to the very foundations of Norse honor. The far-seeing god had suggested that Thor disguise himself as a bride and infiltrate Thrym's wedding feast to recover Mjolnir. He spoke with calm authority, tie housewife's keys about his waist, and pin bridal jewels upon his breast. The idea was so fundamentally opposed to Norse concepts of masculine honor that Thor's initial response shook the very walls of Asgard. He declared the plan preposterous and swore he would never hear the end of it if word spread that the Thunder God had dressed as a woman. The assembled gods watched in tense silence as their mightiest protector wrestled with a challenge that could not be solved through brute force or lightning strikes. They had already considered launching a full assault on Jotunheim, but Thrym's fortress was impregnable and his army vast. No other choice remained. Thor paced the hall like a caged wolf, his massive fists clenched as he grappled with the impossible choice between his warrior's pride and his duty to protect Asgard. Every instinct in his body rebelled against the idea of abandoning his identity as a fearsome warrior to play the role of a delicate bride. Loki stepped forward with barely contained excitement, volunteering to accompany Thor as his maidservant. The trickster god's eagerness to participate in this elaborate deception revealed his true nature. While Thor struggled with the concept, Loki was already plotting the specifics of costumes, mannerisms, and the lies they would need to maintain throughout their dangerous mission. The transformation began with layers of bridal linen draped over Thor's massive frame. Servants brought forth delicate jewelry, housewife's keys that symbolized domestic authority, and a dainty hood for his head. Finally came the precious necklace of Brysinger. Each item added to the disguise felt like another blow to Thor's warrior identity. When he finally looked at his reflection, the god of thunder saw an unconvincing bride staring back at him. Thor finally accepted the plan because no alternative existed. The unlikely pair prepared to set off for enemy territory, where their deception would face its ultimate test among giants, eager to celebrate their lord's triumph. The great hall of Thrym's fortress buzzed with excitement as giants gathered to witness their lord's marriage to the most beautiful goddess in all the 9 realms. Thor sat at the high table in his bridal disguise, surrounded by massive frost giants who raised their drinking horns in celebration. The feast spread before them displayed the giants' wealth and power. Roasted oxen filled enormous platters, fresh salmon gleamed on silver dishes, and barrels of mead stood ready to fuel the night's festivities. Thor's legendary appetite struck like a thunderbolt. He polished off an ox and ate whole salmon in moments, tearing through the meat as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. 3 measures of mead vanished as quickly as if someone had poured them into a bottomless pit. The assembled giants watched in stunned silence as the delicate bride consumed more food than most warriors could handle. Thrym's eyes narrowed with growing suspicion. This goddess ate like a battle-hardened warrior, returning from a long campaign, not like the refined Freya he expected to marry. Loki stepped forward with the smooth confidence of a master storyteller. He spun a tale about Freya's 8-day fast in eager anticipation of reaching Jotunheim and marrying the mighty Thrym. The explanation painted a picture of a lovesick goddess, so excited about her wedding that she had refused all food during her journey. The giants nodded in understanding, their suspicions melting away as they accepted this romantic explanation. Thrym felt honored by such devotion and relaxed completely, his doubts vanishing. Beneath his bridal veil, Thor's rage simmered like molten metal ready to explode. Every moment at the feast brought new challenges as he struggled to maintain feminine mannerisms while surrounded by his enemies. His massive hands shook with barely controlled fury as he watched the giants celebrate what they believed was their victory over Asgard. The critical moment finally arrived. Thrym commanded his servants to bring Mjolnir forth, the very moment Thor had trained his eyes on since dawn. The servants placed the legendary weapon before the disguised bride as part of the traditional ceremony. Thor's fingers closed around Mjolnir's familiar handle, and lightning immediately crackled through the hall. He ripped away his bridal veil and roared his true identity to the shocked giants. Thrym's eyes widened in terror as he realized the bride he had been celebrating was actually the god of thunder himself. Thor swung Mjolnir, killing Thrym instantly after crushing his skull with Mjolnir, then turned on the assembled giants, and even the pleading giantess met Mjolnir's crack before the hall fell silent. The theft that had begun with arrogance ended in complete destruction. This tale reveals how even the mightiest heroes must sometimes sacrifice their pride to protect what matters most. Back in Asgard, the Aesir never spoke of the bearded bride again, though a few still hide a smirk when Thor raises Mjolnir. And we end this story with a very valuable lesson. Never steal Thor's hammer. And if you're going to, don't make him dress like a woman. Tonight you'll meet the nymph whose beauty made Hades plant a forest in her image, a lover who weaponized an apple to hack a goddess's marriage laws, a king who may have raised the dragon that ate his island, a prophet who lived 7 years as each sex and paid with his eyes, and a royal couple whose wrecked ship still calms the winter seas. 5 deep-cut myths, none repeated from previous episodes. Stick around. The last scene explains why every item you just saw is really the same warning. Luce, daughter of Oceanus, shimmered like morning on still water. Hades saw her bathing on the Styx's shore and felt the ache of something that might have been love, if gods knew limits. He swept her into his shadowy chariot. In the underworld, things don't rot the way they should, they transform. When Luce's mortal bloom began to fade, Hades panicked. Unable to bear her disappearing, he offered the only gift he understood, immortality as landscape. He touched her hair. It stiffened into bark the color of moon-bleached bone. Leaves burst silver as coin flip flashes. Luce the woman became Luce the white poplar, blazing at the center of Elysium. Dead heroes rest beneath her, weaving garlands from her two-toned leaves. Dark one side, pale the other, to remind them that joy and grief always grow on the same branch. The Cercopes, twin dwarf tricksters Passalus and Acarus, live by trolling. They steal Heracles' bow and club, giggling about how the hero's butt is black as a kettle from soot. Heracles wakes, grabs both by the ankles, slings them over a pole like squirming fish, and marches toward the city to sell them. Dangling upside down, blood rushing to their heads, the twins can't stop roasting him. Even Heracles, no stranger to rage, breaks into reluctant laughter. But Zeus, hearing their unfiltered comedy, decides the world needs more mischief. He transforms them into the first monkeys, bodies still small, faces still grinning, forever swinging by what once bound them, their own tales. Sailors claim the Cercopes occasionally regain speech during eclipses, whispering new insults at any heroic statue within earshot. King Lycurgus hated surprises. When the brand-new god Dionysus marched through Thrace with drums, wine, and ecstatic maenads, Lycurgus saw a security threat. He banned viticulture, arrested Bacchic followers, even ordered his soldiers to whip the vines until they confessed their treason. Dionysus escaped into sea foam, but vengeance fermented quietly. First, the king's barley crops twisted into miniature grape clusters. Then, every cup in the palace turned to wine, no matter what was poured. Finally, Lycurgus woke screaming. Vines were sprouting from his own feet, snaking up his calves, pinning him to the palace floor. He hacked at them only to realize he was slicing his own flesh. The vines were his veins. Driven mad, he swung an axe at what he thought were tendrils on an oak and beheaded his heir. The gods let him blister in that guilt until locals, terrified, bound him and hurled him into Mount Pangaion's man-eating cave. The vines retracted, but his screams never did. Acontius, a handsome nobody from Chios, spots rich girl Sidippe under the temple colonnade. He can't speak to her, class gap miles wide, but he can exploit Olympus's fine print. He scratches on an apple. I swear by Artemis to marry Acontius. He rolls it to her sandal. She idly picks it up and reads the words aloud, which, in Artemis's precinct, equals a binding oath. Sidippe leaves, confused, but every time her father arranges a proper fiancé, she collapses with fever so savage priests fear plague. The oracle digs through the divine TOS and finds the hitch. She's already sworn. When Sidippe finally weds Acontius, the fevers vanish. Artemis shows up, not angry but amused, honoring the couple with everlasting fidelity in exchange for the clever tribute. Moral: speak casually under a goddess's roof and the contract is in ink you can't see. Long before the Trojan War, the island had no king, only scattered fishermen and goats. Then a stranger arrived, Cycreus, towering, scarred, carrying a bronze spear notched with unknown runes. He spoke little, ate alone, but worked miracles. He dug cisterns where springs burst overnight, charmed a wild stallion into kneeling, and once, locals swear, stood barefoot in a ring of fire to prove courage to the storm god. By year's end, the islanders begged him to rule. They didn't know he walked with a secret. He dreamt every night of fire-scaled dragons devouring his childhood village, and woke with soot under his nails, though no hearth burned nearby. Months after his coronation, goats began disappearing. Nets came up shredded as if bitten by iron teeth. One dusk, a shepherd stumbled into the agora, eyes wide, clutching a bronze scale the size of a dinner plate, edges smoking. He'd found it at the mouth of a cave where the mountain met the sea. Cycreus said nothing, only studied the scale under torchlight. It matched the color of the runes on his spear. That night, villagers saw their king ride alone toward the cave. From cliffs, they watched the torchlight vanish into the maw. Minutes stretched into hours. Then, roaring deep enough to quake wine jars on kitchen shelves, flame burst from the cave mouth. Shadows of two giants, one man, one serpent, wrestled on the cave wall like monstrous puppet theater. At dawn, silence. Cycreus emerged, armor warped, spearhead glowing red. Behind him dragged the colossal corpse of a sea dragon, neck twisted, fangs snapped, eyes like boiled copper. The island erupted in praise. They crowned him with laurel and called him Draken Soter, dragon savior. Yet some noticed his smile was hollow, as if slaying the beast had lanced a boil he secretly cherished. After the triumph feast, Cycreus changed. He paced battlements at midnight, muttering in a guttural tongue. His bathwater steamed black. Servants insisted the steam coiled like a serpent before dissolving. One harvest festival, a child accidentally spilled wine on his boots. Cycreus roared, eyes flashing ember orange, and the boy swore he saw scales ripple under the king's skin. Rumors spread. Had the battle fused man and monster? Or darker, had Cycreus never slain the dragon at all? Had he absorbed it? When storms flattened olive groves and fishermen found their nets burnt as though by underwater fire, the islanders panicked. They begged Eurystheus of Athens to intervene. The hero sailed with 50 hoplites, each carrying asbestos-soaked nets and mirrored shields to confuse reptilian eyes. But at the gate they met not a beast, only their king, bare-chested, spear discarded, arms raised. Cycreus confessed. The dragon's fury had leaked into him. He'd battled it outside and now battled it within, losing ground each night. "Bind me or burn me," he said. Eurystheus chose mercy darker than execution, exile. He ferried Cycreus to Eleusis, gift-wrapping the cursed king for the goddess Demeter, whose own grief could understand corrupted power. Demeter accepted, appointing Cycreus as guardian of her holy processions, his inner fire now repurposed to ward off all lesser threats. As Cycreus's ship slipped away, islanders swore the shoreline hissed, not from waves, but from a dragon's whisper receding with its unwilling host. Salamis kept the dragon's bronze scales nailed above city gates for centuries, tarnished mirrors reminding every leader, "Conquer your monsters, yes, but never wear their skins." Power taken from terror carries terror's seed. When rage becomes crown, abdication may be salvation. Young hunter Tiresias strikes the snakes with his staff. Hera curses him into a woman for 7 years. He marries, bears children, learns the loom songs of grief men never hear. 7 winters later, he meets the serpents again, carefully steps over them, spell breaks. He's male once more. Later, Zeus and Hera bicker. Who enjoys love more, man or woman? They drag Tiresias in as data point. He sides with Zeus. Women feel 9 times the pleasure. Hera, furious, blinds him. Zeus, guilt-struck, gifts prophecy and a lifespan of 7 generations. Thus, the greatest seer of Thebes walks the tightrope of fate without eyesight, yet clearer vision than any living soul. It's said he chuckled on his deathbed. "Blind, I've seen 2 worlds, inside and out." King Ceyx sails to consult an oracle. Wife Alcyone prays he waits for calmer weather. He doesn't. Zeus, annoyed that Ceyx invoked him too often in casual oaths, hurls a thunderstorm that swallows the ship. Ceyx's spirit, soaked and shivering, begs Iris to carry a goodbye. Sleep god Morpheus impersonates Ceyx's drowned corpse in Alcyone's dream. She wakes screaming, runs to the surf. There's the real body, ghost pale in foam. In raw despair, she leaps after him. The gods, pierced by this double plunge, morph the lovers mid-air into halcyon birds, kingfishers with royal blue backs. To let their floating nest survive, Zeus stills the winter seas for 14 days every January. Sailors call it the halcyon days, when storms bank their rage and even grief takes a coffee break. Which transformation slapped hardest? Tree, oath, dragon, gender shift, or bird? Hit the comments. Smash like. If you'll think twice before reading random fruit out loud, subscribe for next week's plunge into the 3 mortals who blackmailed the fates. And ring that bell. Unlike Zeus's thunder, it won't roast you for imposter syndrome. See you in the halcyon calm. You thought fairy tales were magical. Think again. The real origins of these classic tales are disturbing, gruesome, and filled with horror. Many of these stories have been sanitized for modern audiences, but their original versions were filled with betrayal, curses, and brutal consequences. From Pinocchio's horrifying fate to the true story of Bluebeard, let's dive into the darker side of fairy tales that history tried to erase. Fairy tales weren't always about happily ever after. Many of them were cautionary tales, warning of real dangers, human cruelty, and supernatural horrors. 1. The original Pinocchio, a gruesome fate. Before Disney made him a lovable puppet, Carlo Collodi's original Pinocchio was a terrifying little troublemaker. Instead of learning his lesson, he was hanged from a tree by a group of bandits, left to suffocate as a punishment for his misdeeds. 2. Bluebeard, the serial killer's tale. Bluebeard was not a misunderstood nobleman. He was a full-blown serial killer. In Charles Perrault's version, Bluebeard marries multiple women and forbids them from entering one locked room. When his latest wife disobeys, she discovers the corpses of his past wives, hanging from hooks. He nearly kills her too, but she's saved at the last second by her brothers. Some believe this gruesome tale was inspired by real-life figures like Gilles de Rais, a nobleman convicted of horrific crimes. 3. The Pied Piper, a tale of mass disappearance. The Pied Piper of Hamelin was not just about a man who played music to lead away rats. He also took the children. In some versions, the town refuses to pay him for his services, so he takes revenge by luring all of their children into a cave, where they are never seen again. Historians believe this could be based on a real event, where an entire group of children from Hamelin mysteriously vanished in the Middle Ages. 4. Rumpelstiltskin, a vengeful trickster. In the original versions of Rumpelstiltskin, when the young queen guesses his name, he doesn't just leave. He flies into a rage so intense that he tears himself in half. In some versions, he stomps on the ground in fury, falling into a pit and disappearing forever. His obsession with taking the queen's child has led some to believe he wasn't just a trickster, but something far darker. 5. The Robber Bridegroom, a wedding night nightmare. This lesser-known grim tale tells the story of a young woman forced to marry a wealthy man. Suspicious of her husband-to-be, she follows him to his home, only to discover that he and his band of robbers murder and eat women. She watches in horror as they butcher a young girl, cutting her into pieces. Luckily, she escapes and exposes them, leading to their execution. 6. The Juniper Tree, a tale of cannibalism and revenge. One of the most horrifying grim fairy tales, The Juniper Tree tells of a stepmother who decapitates her stepson, cooks his body, and feeds it to his unsuspecting father. The boy's sister buries his bones under a juniper tree, and from the tree the boy returns as a vengeful spirit, transforming into a bird and dropping a millstone on his stepmother, crushing her to death. 7. The Girl Without Hands, a story of betrayal and survival. In this disturbing fairy tale, a poor man accidentally sells his daughter to the devil in exchange for wealth. When she resists the devil's temptations, her own father chops off her hands to fulfill the bargain. Eventually, she escapes, gains magical silver hands, and finds a happier fate, but not before enduring unimaginable suffering. Why were these stories so disturbing? Fairy tales weren't just for children. They were warnings, morality lessons, and sometimes outright horror stories meant to instill fear and obedience. Over time, many of them were altered, softened, or rewritten to make them more acceptable. Which of these dark fairy tales shocked you the most? Want to uncover more forgotten stories and chilling legends? Subscribe now and dive into the forgotten history of fairy tales. Heroes, monsters, tragedies, you know the drill. Tonight we flip the script. Some little-known tales where wit, nerve, or kindness earn outright miracles. Glass number 1 holds a bronze serpent coiled around a sprig of green, and a boy who literally came back sweeter than honey. Knossos in Midsummer smells of rosemary, sea salt, and beeswax. While the court argued harvest taxes, young Glaucus chased a bright blue lizard past the kitchens, through a corridor stacked with amphorae of fermenting honey, and, because small boys fit where gods do not, straight down a ladder into the palace cellars. Down there the air was syrup thick. Glaucus peered into a half-open jar, hoping to see the lizard's tail. One wobble, a slip, a splash. The honey swallowed his cry, sealed itself like amber, and the cellar went still except for the slow fizz of wild yeast. When the nurse discovered an empty playroom, Minos promised royal exiles, or worse, to anyone who failed to find his heir. Search parties raked the island. An oracle finally muttered, "He is where sweetness turns to gold, and the color-changing calf is the compass." Everyone stared blankly, except one messenger who remembered a traveling seer rumored to solve riddles the way bards solve rhyme schemes. Polyidus arrived soaked in salt spray and sarcasm. Minos thrust him in front of the palace's miracle calf, white at dawn, tawny by noon, black at dusk. The king demanded an explanation, and his son before sundown. The seer stroked his beard, watched the calf cycle its living palette, and smiled. "The answer is not the hide, but the eyes," he mused. At dawn, the calf watched the white sun. At noon, bronze. At dusk, onyx night. It mirrored what it beheld. So must the prince. "He is hidden where color vanishes," Polyidus concluded, and descended alone into the wine-dark storerooms. Lantern raised, he located the honey amphora, whose surface held no reflections, only silence. He cracked the seal, found Glaucus suspended in golden stillness, lips blue, limbs floating like reeds in amber. When guards hauled boy and jar to the throne room, Minos's relief curdled into fury. "Resurrect him," he ordered, "or you will keep him company." The seer and the honey coffin were locked inside a stone vault. The bar grinded shut. Torches flickered out. The only light came from honey's inner glow. Polyidus knelt, mind racing through every charm he knew. None could reverse 2 hours without breath. A soft hiss cut the darkness. A serpent, scales gold as harvest wheat, slipped under the door. Polyidus, fearing venom, crushed it with a wine jug. Silence returned, briefly. A second serpent slid beside its fallen mate, circled the body, vanished into a crack, and re-emerged, clutching a sprig of leaves that glimmered with emerald fire. It pressed the herb to the dead serpent's mouth. In a shiver of sinew, the creature revived. The pair slithered away, leaving the leaf behind like a lesson. Polyidus's pulse hammered. He ground the glowing plant between stone shards, smeared the paste across Glaucus's cold lips, and, half praying to gods who seldom pick up, waited. A heartbeat. 2. Then the boy coughed, honey and air and the shriek of returning life. He sat up wide-eyed, asking if lunch was ready. The vault erupted in shouts. Guards dragged them to Minos, whose relief eclipsed his threats. "Teach the child your art," the king commanded, "and you may leave Crete with both eyes intact." For 30 days, Polyidus tutored Glaucus, reading omens in bird flight, divining storms by the smell of stone, decoding dreams as if they were parchment. Each lesson the seer delivered with growing dread. Minos could weaponize prophecy. On the final morning, he presented Glaucus with a cup of wine to seal memory. The boy drank. Polyidus leaned close, whispered a single word, and the wine turned bitter. Glaucus spat it back onto Polyidus's lips. That was the spell. Every technique, every cosmic shortcut drained from the boy's mind like sand through a broken hourglass. He would live healthy, happy, but ordinary. The gift stayed locked in Polyidus's own skull. The seer departed at sunset, pockets empty except for a few stray violet leaves, the serpent herb. Some say he planted them across the Aegean. Others insist he fed them to bees, breeding honey that glows faintly green when moonlight is thin. In mountain apiaries of rural Greece, beekeepers still search for glaucous honey, said to cure a stopped heart if administered within 3 breaths. And every cellar apprentice learns, keep lids tight, keep ladders chained, and keep an eye out for serpents. Sometimes they carry medicines gods never meant us to find. Nymph Princess Cyrene tackles a lion preying on her father's cattle. Apollo, stalking inspiration, watches her wrestling the beast bare-handed and thinks, "Forget liars, that's poetry." He swoops not with roses but a gold chariot pulled by griffins. "Rule a land of your own," he says, pointing across the Mediterranean. Cyrene's answer, "Give me a bowstring and some good soil." She rides shotgun all the way to Libya. On sun-drenched highlands, she spears the ground. Fresh springs burst. The place becomes Cyrene, namesake queen founder. Apollo immortalizes her as a long-lived nymph. Their sons include Aristaeus, future bee-guru, and Idmon, Argonaut prophet. Centuries later, Cyrenean olive oil sells for triple price in Athens. Bottles carry a tiny embossed lion, reminder that one headlock can echo into a civilization. Morning of his birth, infant Hermes crawls out of cradle, spies a tortoise, hollows the shell, strings cowgut. Voila, the first lyre. Same afternoon, he rustles 50 of Apollo's divine cattle, walking them backward to confuse hoofprints. Apollo tracks the tune of an unfamiliar instrument to a cave and catches, not a rustler, a giggling baby. Hermes begins to play. The melody melts Apollo's fury like wax. The sun god trades the entire herd plus the golden staff of herdsmen for the lyre. Contract signed before Hermes can crawl again. Apollo becomes patron of music. Hermes gains official portfolio of travelers, traders, and, ironically, thieves. Every time a guitarist hands a riff to a bandmate for mutual gain, they reenact that cave-side barter. Enslaved courtesan Rhodopis toils in a Nile Delta villa. Her only treasure, a rose-hued slipper dating to her free childhood. She washes linens in the river, humming Ionian lullabies. While drying on the bank, one slipper is whisked by a sacred falcon, messenger of Horus, who drops it into Pharaoh Psammetichus's lap during court. Kings love omens. He declares he will marry the owner. Decree echoes across gnomes. Every woman must try the slipper. Noble women sulk. The shoe fits none until desert winds guide inspectors to Rhodopis scrubbing floors. The leather hugs her heel like destiny. Pharaoh weds the astonished Greek. At festivals, Rhodopis releases doves in thanks, tying our dove myth into hers, while storytellers across the Mediterranean seed the earliest Cinderella variant. Tyrrhenian pirates spy a pretty youth on an island. Clueless, it's Dionysus in vacation mode. They abduct him, plotting ransom. Helmsman Acoetes senses trouble but is overruled. Ropes fall off as ivy coils up masts. Sweet wine floods planks. Panthers materialize, purring menace. Pirates jump ship in panic. Instead of vengeance, Dionysus transforms them into dolphins so they can atone by guiding sailors. Acoetes receives priesthood and a lifetime ticket to every Bacchic festival. Mediterranean fishermen still toss libations overboard for the merry sailors, believing every dolphin escort is a pirate making cosmic amends. On a Boeotian hillside, twin princes Amphion and Zethus debate destiny. Zethus flexes farm boy muscle, shouting, "Stone walls rise by calloused hands." Amphion replies by tuning a 7-string lyre, a gift Apollo slipped into his cradle. They inherit a dream, rebuild ruined Thebes. Zethus drives oxen and hefts limestone, but progress is glacial. At sundown, Amphion plucks a chord so pure nightingales freeze mid-song. Blocks quiver, lift and float into place. Each note a crane, each chord a pulley. Workers drop their levers and just watch. The wall grows faster than dawn's shadow. Jealous masons challenge him to raise the Cyclopean gate alone. Amphion smiles, strums a rugged minor scale. Boulders lumber across the valley like obedient elephants. Zethus, not to be outdone, times hammer blows to his brother's rhythm. For one glorious hour, hard labor becomes rock ballet. When the ramparts close,